in supporting national climate change strategies. Just a quick word about Toronto Centre. Since our inception in 1998, we have trained more than 15,000 central bankers and supervisors from 190 countries and territories to build more stable, resilient, and inclusive financial systems. In 2016, we began incorporating climate change in our programming because of the substantial implications to global financial stability and risk of crisis from climate change. Because climate change is a global challenge, it is vital that central banks and supervisory authorities contribute to their nation's climate strategy to turn their jurisdictions more resilient. This is also an ongoing international concern in line with the undertaking of the Network of Greening the Financial Systems, which is composed of 94 central banks and supervisory authorities. In the aftermath of the devastating impact of global pandemic on economies and people's livelihoods, this proactive crisis preparedness is essential for all countries to mitigate against the impact of climate shocks. So it's no longer just about credit. A crisis can come from anywhere and affect everything. It is my honor to welcome our two distinguished speakers. They're leading their nation's supervisory efforts to tackle these challenges and are great international influences. I do not have time to read their bios because it would take a full hour. Their accomplishments are too many, but you have received their bios. Unar Gunnarsdottir is Deputy Governor for Financial Supervision, Central Bank of Ireland. And I've also discovered that she was in Toronto for a couple of years, attending one of our prestigious law schools. Thomas Soleil is Superintendent of the General Superintendency of Insurance of Costa Rica, or SUGESE. Toronto Centre's mission is generously supported by Global Affairs Canada, Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, the IMF, Jersey Overseas Aid, Comic Relief, and the USAID. In fact, I was looking at the list of participants, and I hope our friend Kerry Max from GAC is here. I saw his name, so hello, Kerry, if you are. I would also like to thank my team of Demet Kanakcha and Ashley Thompson and Haley Love, who worked so hard to bring this program to you. We will have 3 rounds. I will pose 3 questions alternating between each speaker, and then I will take questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A tab to submit your questions. All I ask is that your questions please be brief because there won't be a lot of time to read long questions. Unnur, I'm wondering if I can start with you. And
sure.
Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Iceland's priority targets reflect the government's emphasis on SDG action with respect to climate change, SDG 13. What are your objectives and challenges at the national level? What role does the central bank have in reaching those objectives? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The Icelandic government has ambitious targets on meeting the Paris Agreement, such as reducing greenhouse gas by 55% from 1990 to 2030. We are in coalition with Norway and EU on this. And Iceland, to name another target, Iceland aims to be carbon neutral by 2040. So what are the main challenges? I would say that the main challenges to reach these goals are with regard to transportation, mainly the fleet of the fishing vessels, as we are a big fishing nation. The challenge is the transition of energy. As the fishing vessels, they're now using diesel, and they're not so easy to change into being run on electricity. But the industry is looking into hydrogen for this. Apart from transportation, Iceland is mainly using renewable energy already and has been for a long time. We are not dependent on fossil fuels to heat our houses, so there's a challenge to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by such a large percentage as we start from a relatively good place with a lot of renewable energy. What's the role of the central bank? It has a wide mandate. It's an integrated central bank. as a monetary authority, as well as an authority for financial stability and financial supervision. And the supervisory mandate is as wide as it gets. We're responsible for regulating and supervising all the financial services sectors, the banks, the insurance companies, the pension funds, and the securities markets. So we don't see direct references to the role of the central bank in Iceland's priority targets as such. But we in the central bank are committed to supporting the government's objectives in every way we can. And it's already very high on our agenda. And as for the supervisory part, financial institutions play a key role financing the transition to renewable energy and a more sustainable economy. So the supervisor is an important standard setter. So in the end, we.
Uh-oh, I think we lost her. Do we have? Ashley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Babak.
So I guess only she is the one who's okay.
Yes.
So we're going to come back to her in a second. Let me switch to Tomas. Tomas, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I hear you very clearly.
Okay, great. Tomas, let me switch to you and we go back to Onur in a second. First of all, you're a very good friend of Toronto Center. We have worked with your agency and your sister agencies in Costa Rica, and we find that your officials are very engaged in capacity building. And also you play a very big role in Latin America as the head of the Insurance Association, ASAL, but also in your country, you're very active and engaged. Let me ask you this question. Climate change is also at the top of the Costa Rican government agenda. Can you tell us a bit about Costa Rica's climate change strategy and the role of SUGESE, your agency, in your national climate change strategy, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Babak. First of all, thank you for this invitation. It's a real pleasure to have this conversation with you. Costa Rica in 2019 was honored with the Champions of the Earth Award. That is the United Nations highest environmental recognition for its strong vocation in the protection of the environment and ambitious policies to combat climate change. The leadership of environment commitment of my country has so huge historical roots. It is based on the foundations of human development established by Constitution since 1949. Costa Rica is a middle-income country with the oldest democracy and a strong democracy in Latin America. And also, it is the country that decided to abolish the army more than 70 years ago in order to finance the universal education and health system. It is remarkable that the last 6 years, Costa Rica generated more than 98% of its electricity in a renewable way. And the last 25 years, the country stopped the deforestation, and today almost 60% of the land is once again forest. So this is Costa Rica, my country, a climate champion. And with that background, let me summarize the main ideas about Costa Rica's climate change strategy with 3 main components. First, ambitious commitment. Second, a strong public policy. And third, a net benefit estimation. Let me move on the first one. The country presented in the context of the Paris Agreement, the most ambitious national determined contribution NDC in 2015. Despite this, in December 2020, Costa Rica informed a more ambitious commitment and aligned it with the global goal of average increased temperature to 1.5. It is clear that ambition commitment needs a strong public policy. And that is the second component. Costa Rica climate change strategy could be explained by 2 central policy instruments. First, the National Decarbonization Plan 2019-2050, which established long-term mitigation measures, and the National Adaptation Policy 2018-2030 that defines short and medium-term policy action for adaptation. Finally, the full implementation of the decarbonization plan has been estimated that could bring 41 billion USA dollars in net benefit to the economy by 2050. So Costa Rica's climate change strategy includes mid and long-term targets to reform transport, agriculture, energy, waste, and land use. One of the most important aspects to consider in this is the just transition approach that seeks to maximize the creation of decent jobs and sustainable businesses, minimize job destruction, and promote the generation of green jobs. This strategy also incorporates a gender focus in the intervention. So through these instruments, the country's agenda has been defined and some actions were incorporated. Finally, let me talk a little about what is SUGES's role in this strategy and what could be the main concerns. There are some topics that are extremely important to care about. The first one is the climate protection gap that appears to be worse because of slow adaptation action and more frequent and extreme weather events. Currently, less than 5% of the total losses have been insured, the total losses from climate events here in Costa Rica. And in this context, SUGES approved a new inclusive insurance regulation and also clarified regulatory issues in relation to the development of indexed insurance. Second, the supervisor's responsibility to warn the market about this risk of climate change. In that sense, an open discussion and training groups on climate risk were organized by insurer and banking supervisors. Since the beginning of 2020, the banking and insurance sector had set up their own working groups and are so active. And finally, it is critical to have a coordinated work between the financial regulators and the central bank. We just began this close coordination with creation of a working group with the central bank and all the superintendents here in Costa Rica. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Actually, your explanation was very interesting. In fact, we may come back to that in a second about some of that cross-sectoral coordination and cooperation. And I think some in our audience probably got notice of the fact that although we're talking about climate change, it is really astonishing and interesting that Costa Rica abolished its military such a long time ago, given the region you're in. So we like to learn about that too, but that goes beyond the mission of Toronto Center. So that's for another conversation over beer, maybe when next time I'm in San Jose. Hey, we have Honor back. Hi, Honor, how are you?
Hi, I'm glad to be back. This was rather alarming because somehow the net died. It failed the internet of the central bank.
We always love to have a little bit of excitement in our program. Yeah. So, is there anything else you wanted to say, or do you think you completed your talk?
I think I had completed what I sort of in substance what I wanted to say.
Okay, so we'll come back to that as well because there's a lot of interesting things, and I see questions already being asked. So, put you on the spot again. It's your turn again.
Okay.
Last December, the Iceland Central Bank joined the Network for Greening the Financial System, NGFS, along with some other organizations. What kind of supervisory actions have you taken to combat climate change so far?
First, I want to mention greenwashing. The banks and other financial institutions have started promoting their greening policy. An example that comes to mind is one of our major banks has granted honors to companies for sustainability. So this is a big marketing issue for them and for the insurance companies. So it's the role for the supervisor to carry out checks whether they're living up to their promises and not mis-selling brown products for green. That's one issue that we are very well aware of looking into. In the securities market division, we have seen in prospectuses that some issuers are more advanced than others in their greening efforts. The National Energy Company is an example of good practice as an issuer of bonds. They've set measurable targets with regard to climate, promising higher interest rates on their bonds if they fail to reach the targets. So it's a trade-off that they're offering their investors. We in the central bank, we don't have a clear mandate in combating greenwashing in securities or as yet, but we are very well aware of this risk or danger. Direct climate risk on portfolios is another issue. We have requested reports from the banks on how they're assessing climate-related risk, especially for the credit risk. We're currently analyzing those reports. Some stress testing has already been taking place to evaluate the resilience to natural disasters. I want to mention Iceland is an associated state to the EU, so we're obliged to homogeneity in legislation and practice. Exactly 1 year ago, the so-called taxonomy regulation entered into force in the European Union. This taxonomy regulation sets out an EU-wide framework. It's a classification system according to which investors and businesses can assess whether certain economic activities are sustainable. So it's sort of a dictionary of what activities may or may not be called sustainable. So this is sort of a standard that we have been waiting for, and now it's already in place. This taxonomy regulation, it provides a common language to identify environmentally sustainable activities and financial instruments. And it's supposed to be used by investors, the financial institutions, and issuers. So this will definitely provide us, as I said before, with an additional tool to combat climate change and promote a more sustainable financial market. So these are sort of issues that I wanted to mention in this respect.
That's great.
And I'm still with you. I'm glad about that.
I'm glad. No, it's very interesting. I mean, I was just listening to what you said earlier on, which is greenwashing. I'm so glad that you're taking that on. Like, and you're seeing that all the time. Like, ESG is such a popular thing. Mm-hmm. And if you just do a casual look at the investment products out there, mutual funds or exchange traded funds, ETFs, sometimes you see that a fund that's branded as ESG has an MER that's 10 times more than a regular basic index, and yet the constituent parts are nearly identical. So you can, on the one hand, go and beat up a bank and then come and put the same bank in an ESG fund, right? So it's very good that you're doing that, and it speaks to disclosure. G7 itself made disclosure, said they're backing the mandatory implementation of disclosure. So it's very good. This is actually important that you mentioned that. And so let's move on there to the next question for Tomas. Tomas, as your role as the head of the insurance sector supervisor in Costa Rica, do you think climate change affects certain sectors of the financial industry more than others? What are your thoughts on this? And the background to this question is, as an insurance supervisor, you guys have really been at the forefront of this for a very, very long time, right? It's not a new topic for you, but now you're seeing your brothers and sisters from other sectors coming in, other companies, and this whole financial sector is so integrated. So what are your thoughts on this question?
Thank you, Babak. So, of course, that is a crucial question for financial supervisor. And in the case of Costa Rica, when we must coordinate with another three services, it is very, very important to have this clear. In my opinion, climate change related risk affects some of the financial sector differently and more intensely compared to others. Nevertheless, of course, there are some of the risks that could affect all sectors without difference. So let me divide the analysis in two questions. How do physical and transition risks affect the economy? And are there different impacts for certain financial services? So let me elaborate a little bit. First, it is clear that physical and transition risk correspond to the purest concept of climate risk. For instance, understanding how those risks are transmitted to the economy is essential, and how that new reality of the economy is transmitted to the balance sheet is the critical topic. In one hand, the science predicts for physical risk greater severity and frequency of weather events. If there are no climate plans if there are no climate plans in the country or in the world, it will be worse, of course. Some of the expected impacts to households and businesses are losses of income, property damages, and business interruption. In the case of banking entities, the credit could be aggravated, the credit risk, due to scenarios of greater impact on income of households and businesses. And for non-life insurance, underwriting risk will be aggravated by the greater volatility and severity of physical risk. As you said, insurance is in the front and will be affected in both sides of the balance sheets. In the liability and of course in the asset part too. On the other hand, transition risk is affected for policy and regulation, technology changes, and consumer preferences. In this last one is very important that what Anders saying about the disclosure and the public confidence about the greening finance and all those topics. In the case of transition risk, it is possible to observe restrictions from low carbon policies, as we are seeing in our countries, a new capital expenditure for technological transition, legal liabilities. There is possible to find some opportunities as the green bonds and greening financing in our countries, but there are some new risks too. Market risks and liquidity risks must be assessment and must be analyzed in this new reality of our countries. So there are continuous climate and economic effects and continuous economy and financial system feedback effects. The financial supervisors must be aware that climate change related risks represent a serious threat to the solvency and stability of the financial markets, and there are asymmetrical effects for different financial services. For us in Costa Rica, these first steps to coordinate all the financial services are really important in order to have an integrated and a roadmap that will be more consistent. So I think that we can. I think that that is true, and we cannot ignore it for much longer. It's time definitely to take actions about those topics. Thank you, Babak.
Thank you very much, Tomas. Next question goes to Onur. Onur, you know what the MIT Green Futures Index is, but let me explain to our participants. It's a ranking of 76 leading countries and territories under progress and commitment towards building a low carbon future. So it's a pretty comprehensive global index. According to this index from the MIT, Iceland ranked #1 in the overall rankings amongst the examined economies with regards to certain pillars used in the research: carbon emissions, energy transition, green society, clean innovation, and climate policy. Sounds like it's the Oscars. You got the Oscars in greening. Good for you. And this is your acceptance speech, I guess, but hopefully a shorter acceptance speech. What powers and tools can financial supervisors use in addressing climate-related financial risks? How are you encouraging environmental risk analysis by financial institutions in Iceland? I mean, I imagine being such a progressive country, having done so much, there's a lot more pressure on your banks, right, than in some other countries, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't really know about that, but the powers and tools that we have, being a risk-based supervisor, we can use all the powers and tools that we have already in store to tackle risk. But the challenge here is to analyze and evaluate the climate-related risk. In banking, this reflects mainly credit risk and the evaluation of the quality of loans and collateral. But so this can be directly reflected into the capital requirements that we as a supervisor can require the banks. But there is a job undone in developing and refining our methodology on how to analyze and evaluate these risks. And this applies to the market as well, how they assess the risk. So we need to learn more about this. That's why this taxonomy regulation is also so important to us. I mentioned stress testing before. That's of course an important tool. With regard to insurance, it's important to evaluate the potential protection gap that we see increasing globally. And well, nations can look into maybe political initiatives to fill this protection gap by providing state insurance. Iceland, as an island of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, avalanches, and such disasters, we have such a state insurer in Iceland, and we are grateful for that. We've had it for a long time. We are participating in a European project to evaluate potential risk to financial stability. So it's not only sort of classical supervisory, but also the financial stability focus on it, caused by recent catastrophes that have been happening in Europe, such as forest fires and floods and more. The disasters in Iceland are maybe not as typical as the same catastrophes as we see in other countries. Pension funds are extremely important in Iceland. Their assets amount to double the GDP, so their investments are crucial for the economy. In the legislation that they abide to, they are supposed to invest by ethical standards, as it says. This is, of course, rather open to interpretation, but the funds, they generally use the ESG principles as guidance for what is ethical standards. However, the pension funds are required to opt for 3.5% real interest on their portfolios. So they can get into a dilemma deciding to invest in brown shares or bonds with higher interest rates rather than green with lower. But then also they might have the possibility as such an important investor to influence businesses to become greener. So this is an actual discussion in Iceland. So overall, we have some tools already in place, but we still need to improve by the criteria and the methodology and learn from real life. That's what I wanted to say on this one.
That's great. And Onur, I used to work for a very large institutional investor, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. So I'm kind of familiar with these ethical dilemmas that you're talking about, because On the one hand, we all want to be ethical, we all want to do this, but then where do you draw the line, right?
Yeah.
At what point do you say, I have had enough of ethicals, and then what happens to that return? So no, it's a very tough balance. Tomas, you get the last structured questions, then we go to the audience. You are the president of the Supervisory Association for Latin American Insurers, ASAL, and I had the pleasure to talk to ASAL just before the pandemic. I was probably one of the last speakers there in an actual setting. What are the supervisory and industry practices in the regions with regards to addressing climate-related financial risks and what needs to be done? Now, when I'm asking you this question, I'm not asking you to opine on specific countries, but just in general, as you observe that, what do you see? Thank you.
Thank you, Babak, for this question. As you know, Latin America is an interesting region and so diverse and asymmetric. There are some differences of the economic and social development, but also regarding the insurance market, Latin America shows challenges on the supervisory practices. ASAL has become a space for exchange and discussion of experience throughout the region. And we are maintaining a permanent dialogue with the IIIS, NAIC, and EIOPA for, say, some of the main insurance associations in order to keep supervisory practice updated. Since the Costa Rica's market opened in 2008, we have found in ASAL and some of their members a very valuable space for exchanging experiences and supervisory practices. And I am sure it is the same for the supervisory community in the region. For the climate change related risk will not be different. However, the region has great challenges on this path of adopting better supervisory practices, and the last years there has been a regional effort to increasingly adopt better practices. I am interested in highlighting 4 important regulatory advances in the region. First, the implementation of risk-based supervision frameworks in some countries. In my opinion, this has been one of the most important changes in supervisory practices in Latin America. The countries that have completed the implementation have observed notable improvements in the quality of corporate governance and risk management in their market. And for instance, in the stability and security of its markets. Second, we have a huge challenge in the near future, that is the adoption of IFRS 17. The adoption of this accounting standard introduces very profound changes for both the supervisor entities and the insurance companies. And third, the improvements of risk-based capital regimes. Some jurisdictions will be waiting to consolidate some of the corporate governance and risk assessment in the risk-based supervision, and some of the changes in IFRS 17 before beginning this kind of improvement. And last, Babak, the adoption of business conduct models and new regulation in regard of closing the protection gap and being more accessible the insurance in our market. Finally, I would like to address the SDG challenges and climate change. I am so happy to inform you that a few weeks ago, the ASAL Board of Directors created the Working Group for Sustainability and Climate Change. And on next August, we will continue these discussions in the first high-level meeting sustainable insurance in Latin America. This event is organized by ASAL and A2II and will allow us to define the roadmap and next steps. The region we have in the region that some of the supervisors have take advanced in some of the topics. They are talking. They are having an open conversation with the industry, and they are fixing their expectations and hearing the industry concerns too. Maybe one of the important concerns in this moment could be the effects of the pandemic and the needs to begin again with more activity in our economies, and maybe that could be a little concern. How much the climate change could stop that? I think nothing. I think we must to begin the work in order to be connected with our public policies and make our country more resilient and put it in the new reality, new normality, growing path. I'm really very excited about the formal incorporation of this topic in the regional agenda. Babak, I come to you again.
Thank you. No, that's great. And I think you have a very interesting opportunity and a big challenge as well, because there are many countries in your region that are very strong producers of natural resources, including petroleum, and some of them, so it's going to be very interesting dialogue. We see that a lot in Canada, right? Like we have in the province of Ontario, Ontario's economy is as large as Sweden and Denmark combined. And people in Ontario, probably for them, climate change means very different than Saskatchewan and Alberta that are so dependent on natural resources and petroleum. So, you know, those discussions and debates play out all the time. So I suspect it would be the same for you. So now let's move to the audience section, and let's try to see as we can get as many of them as possible. We have a good list of questions here. I think I'm going to give the very first question to you, Anar. Shobak Keynes asks, what guidance would you give to financial institutions in the incorporation of climate change risk in their enterprise risk management frameworks? Thank you.
Can you repeat the beginning of the question? Is it about what advice we would give the...
Yeah, what guidance would you give to financial institutions as they're incorporating climate change risk as part of their ERM framework? Yeah.
Well, sort of broadly speaking, is I would go into either both learn from experience, you know, avoid older mistakes in evaluating the risk of maybe making a mistake of granting loans to a polluting industry or something like that, but also as I said before, it's useful to have some standards that are, we have to learn from our own experience, but we also have to learn from others. That's sort of so for us as such a small economy, it's a very important backbone to us to be the associated state to the European Union and learn from their expertise and initiatives. So I don't have a very concrete advice for that. So because we are very much in the learning process of this ourselves.
Yeah, we're all learning together, right?
Yeah.
So that's the important thing.
Yeah.
And Tomas, the next question is for you. Please provide a brief overview of the role of supervisors and regulators in climate change risk review of financial institutions. So when you look at the role of supervisors, where do they add value in that?
Okay, thank you. I think there is a very important role of supervisor, because the supervisor must present what are their expectations about the climate change risk assessment from the institutions. And if you have a risk management, a risk-based supervision approach, it is maybe a little more easy. That is because it's possible to centralize, first of all, the collecting data, and centralize the taxonomy about the quality of the data. That will be important in the case of Costa Rica, be coordinated with all the financial services. And secondly, it's important to share with the financial institutions what the regulatory and supervisory expectations are, and how we expect they put in their own risk appetite and in their own risk assessments the way they will be monitoring and analyzing this kind of risks. So I think it is a huge and important role in order to spread out in all the market best practices that we are seeing in one entity and not in another, and give them a lot of feedback about these first steps in assessing the climate risk. The climate-related risk in our jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you. And let me go back to Onur. Onur, there's a question here from a person by name of his or her last name is Green, so it's very appropriate, right? So it's a green person. Maybe they have all the answer. The question is, what is the role of financial services policymakers and supervisors to create a green finance framework in smaller jurisdictions? So I guess the question behind the questioner's question is that there's big jurisdictions, and he or she says mega jurisdictions have all these big grand plans. Well, what happens to small jurisdictions like yours or Tomas's? Like, is that different? Is that a different challenge, different opportunity?
I don't see it as such. I find that every country has to learn about the dangers and risks that they are facing, and some countries are more dependent on their environment, sort of other countries adjacent to them, and then there are islands like Iceland is. We have the ocean, we have glaciers that are melting, so we've had massive earthquakes. We have a volcanic eruption going on 50 kilometers from Reykjavik. So to us, it's not just nice to have measures in place and knowing what we should do. We may need other measures than some bigger countries that are not as volatile. One of the things that we have to face as a small country is, or small countries have to face, that they are usually much more volatile than the larger ones. So I feel it's more or less the same as before. It's we need to stand on our feet and be realistic on what we're facing, each and every country, also the small ones. And although it's good and useful for us to learn from the bigger ones, from what they have to contribute, but every country has to analyze their own situation.
Okay, thank you for that. And Tomas, for you,
I totally agree with Onur, and with the country that my country is so small than Iceland, but it's not. It's less rich. It's middle income country. Of course, there are a lot of learn from each other. It's not possible to translate and regulation from developed country to an emerging country just in that because our markets are small, less development, and have a lot of space to grow up. But actually, there is a true. We have faced, and Costa Rica is in the top of the country that face that are more exposed to catastrophic risk in the world. We are in the top 10, I think. So we have done this job for a long time, and if just forget climate change, we have done we have achieved these goals to have a more stable and safe market. So I mean, with climate change doesn't change that situation. That is only that we must to learn a lot from each other. Maybe we will to translate some of the topics of the new solvency or new risk assessment approach depending of our with a proportionality bias, depending of our reality, and that would be my comment.
Well, I mean, I think it underscores the fact that both of your countries are in a very difficult challenge because, you know, there are countries that are climate change makers and there are countries that are climate change takers. The two of you are that. I mean, look at Iceland, surrounded by water, and Tomas, you guys are between two oceans. So every time our polar bears lose their habitat, your water levels go up, right? So at the end of the day, we're all connected. But I take your point. There's no room for climate change mitigation imperialism, right? Everybody has to learn their story, but collaborate on the information together. So it's a good question now from my colleague, good colleague Prasanna Seshan. If he's talking about carrots and sticks, right? So you can't just mandate things and make them very, prohibitive. So as a supervisor, I guess, Thomas, I'm going to pass this to you. As a supervisor, what are the carrots and sticks you would employ to motivate and penalize institutions to address climate change, particularly for smaller emerging economies? Like, do you have carrots, or is it all just regulatory sticks? I guess that's the question.
No, I think the world change with when you put in practices the risk-based supervision, and the most important in this approach is to know very well know what is doing the supervisor entity, how they are following and reaching the supervisor expectations. Right now we have no rules for climate change, but we are working on a stress test with the companies. We are capturing some information and talking a lot with them. So in these first steps, there are more carrots than sticks. I mean, the risk is there. The climate change won't give us suddenly an event that put everything in the bad way. That is not too slow, but we have changed to implant this new regulation and this new vision in our markets. But I think it is we have a goal that is have those things more development for in 3-4 years and have a more clear picture about what will be the carrots and what will be the sticks, because of course they will affect the solvency and the capital requirements. That's a real solution, but not in the short term.
Well, and the reality is, the longer you wait, there's an easier conversion of the carrot to the stick, right? Because then you have to compel people. So I want to turn to Onur. And Onur, this is a question from our anonymous attendee. I like to call them courageous anonymous, right? They're very courageous. They don't put their name down. But the question is an interesting one. It could be a bit of a grenade, but nonetheless, it's a legitimate question. It's, you talked about pensions and all that. So in a low interest rate context that we live in now, it seems difficult to justify environmental haircuts against the payout of pension investors and savers. How do you, not you so much, but how do you justify that for your policy overseers, economic ministry or equivalent? Like, what is that conversation? Give us a flavor of that conversation in Iceland. I'm sure it's come up. Someone's worked all their life, they're ready to retire, then someone says, sorry, you can't be investing in all these companies because of environmental concerns. Now what?
We're not very advanced in this as yet. We know that in some other OECD countries there are divisions in pension funds that people can opt voluntarily for, that invest solely in green products. So the pension fund, the member of the pension fund, it decides for himself what risk shall be taken in this respect, also for the profits. So this might be sort of the democratic way forward in this. We have not yet taken this discussion here in Iceland, maybe within the pension funds, but they are obligatory in Iceland. It's a legal duty and to be a member of a pension fund and pay into that. So and usually people cannot choose the pension fund itself, so that makes the ones who manage them more. It's more stringent that they cannot have people cannot choose between green or brown or risk taking and such. So I think the future would be maybe to make this more, to disclose it, to make this more obvious. And then there's one point that has been taken also in this discussion, is that, well, as such important investors, the pension funds can if they decide to invest in brown business, they can turn it over, because if they are of a certain size, they are so influential that they can really affect so they are. We can. I think that we will see some changes in this respect, but as yet we're still very much fixed on the profit margin of the investments of the funds. So we're not as advanced as I would like to be able to tell you today, but we're looking into these aspects.
It's a big issue because on the one hand, yes, pension funds have a lot of opportunity to influence change, and they bring the muscle of their investments, but they also have pension obligations. They have fiduciary responsibility. They can't just walk away from that. So I can see that being a very tough problem and a tough challenge. I want to ask a question. We have limited time, and I want to address it to each of you to give your views on it. There are some skeptics out there in the supervisory community that say, well, all this stuff about climate change, fine, is very important. But at the end of the day, supervisors really cannot take their eye off financial stability and credit problems, because they do that, and then they chase these trends, then they get distracted. What's your answer to them, Onur? And then I'll go to Thomas.
Well, it depends on how far-sighted you want to be. In the end of the day, I assume we need alignment between the dangers that the climate change is imminent and the risk. So I think we're seeing things happening quite rapidly nowadays, but it's not a long time that we are into this. So in the end of the day, I think it's for financial stability, it's really crucial that we don't we're not careless about how the businesses are run and how they're financed. So I think that in the long run, this will be aligned.
Thank you. And Tomas, you've been a trailblazing leader in Costa Rica on these issues, and being a leader sometimes can be very lonely. I'm sure you've heard these skeptics from different agencies and others talk about that. What is your answer to them in 1 minute?
I have no a complete answer right now. That is because we have divided the financial supervision, and that is an issue in our country. But this is a hot trend topic right now in Costa Rica, where we just built the working group with Central Bank and the supervisor, and I think we will talk a lot about this topic in the near future. We are just now not finishing. We are in the middle of the final of the pandemic, I think, and there are some risks that we must to balance in our financial market and so on. These new challenges must be calibrated and must be put in the growing path for the near future. I'm totally sure.
Excellent, thank you. So it just gives me great pleasure to bring this session to an end. We had people from 46 different countries attending, almost all letters of the alphabet, from B, Barbados to Zimbabwe. So I don't know what happened to Argentina, and I think, Thomas, you're going to have to talk to your colleagues there, and Anguilla and also elsewhere. But you talked about the issues in a very good, measured way. I have a lot of respect for you as two jurisdictions that are small, but really are punching above your weight on this, and you're influencing regional and international discussions. Hope you're not going to be a stranger and participate in other Toronto Centre programs. So thank you very much. You did great, and namaste. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice being with you.